It turns out that we, like the earth, make primary water. And that changes everything because the water that we're meant to have is made by us. Insofar as you're healthy, one of the definitions is all the water that's in you, you made yourself.
Hi, and welcome back to Reclamation Radio. I am Dr. Kelly Brogan, and I have the distinct pleasure of being in conversation today with the one and only Dr. Tom Cowan. I don't even think you refer to yourself as a doctor anymore. I do. So Dr. MD Tom Cowan, who has been on a couple of episodes already previously. So I will provide a brief intro, which is just to say that this fine gentleman is my personal advisor in chief. And we are going to be talking about one of the many questions that I pepper him with on a very regular basis. And I would say that the context, the frame for why it is that I have positioned Tom in my own personal and professional life in this way is really the way that he sifts and sorts reality, right? So I am a subscriber to the David Data informed perspective that the masculine is consciousness, right? And so when we have a developed consciousness, we have a developed masculine energy, right? When we are aligned with that, we are engaging in things like, integrity of word and follow through and clarity of thought, wise action, directionality. And one of the dimensions of masculine energy that I had trouble finding in other free thinkers is a regulated system, a self-possessed individual who has the capacity to rest in not knowing, in uncertainty, which actually I think is a physiologic phenomenon. Like if you have not developed the capacity to hold the fears and the identity diffusion and all the things that come up when you don't know the answer, you don't have the capacity to sit in the very, very fertile space, this liminal space of the not knowing. And I have watched Tom do this on a public basis, which is probably the most challenging practice of all. So his willingness to be wrong and his willingness to sit with a question until it is ripe. And then, as we discuss sort of like what might be possible, there is a lightness with which he holds. And what's interesting is the discernment that then comes through feels extremely trustworthy to me. And I have had the pleasure of spending time at Tom's homestead with his radiant goddess of a wife, Linda, and to really appreciate the simplicity with which you move through the world. And we'll be talking today about some, I hope you're willing to share some of your personal habits and practices, because I think that this is how I orient now these days, is finding trustworthy sources of reality sifting and sorting, and then allowing that to sort of percolate within. So as always, Tom, I am super excited to be in public conversation with you and to share your wisdom and really the way that you explore and think about these very essential reframes and questions with everyone who's listening. So welcome.
Thank you. It hit me that, we're both, to a certain extent, some part of our life anyways is in the public domain, right? And as I say now, we leave a paper trail. And so if I was to say, oh, I'm never wrong, somebody might show, by the way, Tom, do you see this book here? You got your name on it, and you said that there was these measles viruses, 6 years ago. What do you think of that? Then I would say, well, yeah, right. So I think there was like a gremlin. They came in and they faked my name and put this. So it wasn't. I'd have to really think fast on my feet So at the end of the day, it just is easier to say, yeah, I made a mistake.
But that's why what you share is not the answers, right? Because it's a trap to imagine that we can, again, I always think this way. It's an immature masculine trap that I certainly have fallen into, that you can collect all of the answers and then declare yourself master of the domain. It's not how it works, right? So to be a vessel through which reality is transmitted to orient others around you, that is the task, and that is a process. So you're constantly relating to what is new. One of the and being clarified, one of the episodes that we recorded was on sort of myth busting with regard to organelles and cells and genes. And I don't know that we were even ready as a collective to begin to explore the possibility that down to the language of cellular biology that is colloquial. I mean, people who know nothing about biology, have heard of things like the mitochondria. It's even used in marketing material, right? And so to begin to understand, okay, maybe we have to really explore the assumptions, what you and I were just talking about before we started recording, the assumptions that are underpinning, and just begin to expose them. That's more orienting than here is the replacement theory, right? And it's not that we don't consider those, because it's fun. It's fun to consider those. And we're going to do that today. So I asked Tom to come chat with me today because I had asked him for his opinion on what is going on with water today. So I have, 2 daughters, and I was telling him, because obviously his kids are grown and older, so they may not be in this particular trend. I was telling him that it's a trend right now for, teenage girls to walk around with like a garbage pail size water cup with a straw in it called a Stanley. And, my little waif of a daughter is like hauling this water thing everywhere she goes. And, I've been joking with her, as I know many people are recognizing, especially from my generation, we never drank water, never. And if we did, we had only tap water. And it just was not part of the dominant culture to consider drinking water. And older generations, like I was talking to my mom about this, and everyone is just kind of confused about how it's now become the case that you can't go to, a dance or yoga or exercise class without water bottles falling all over the floor. I can't imagine being at an airport and not, buying a $10 bottle of water so that I can fly. This idea of, traveling through the world with your aliquot of water has become so culturally normative that I'm not sure how many people have stepped back and said, what's actually happening here? And so when I asked you, I said, do you think that we are just dehydrated by, electromagnetic, pollution? Do you think it's just all of the toxicant body burden? Do you think we are just this dehydrated because of how things have gone awry and we need to just keep replenishing it? Because I know, myself and others have trouble drinking 2 to 3 liters of water. It does not feel pleasurable. It doesn't feel natural. And, when I used to talk to Nick Gonzalez about this, he would say, your thirst mechanism is basically like habitually suppressed, right? So you need to sort of like reactivate it. And the only bit of context for this that I want to share before we dive in is that anyone in my life, Tom included, knows that I did a water fast back in the summer of 2022, a 9-day water-only fast inspired by our friend and ally, Andy Kaufman, who did a 26, I believe, day version of what I did and has done that subsequently with no sequelae, and he's doing great. And when I did it, it was in the context of a lot of psycho-emotional swirls, let's say, like stressors, and it was like big shifts happening in my personal sphere. And I have had enduring effects, let's say, that I can tie to that water fast. Now, again, was the emotional piece, like the tipping point was my 3 years of vegetarianism beforehand, the tipping point, who knows? It doesn't really matter. But I got a lot of brainwashing through that experience led by a 30-year frugivore around how essential it is to drink lots of water every day. Of course, filtered, structured water, but 2 to 3 liters every single day. and that salt is problematic, and there's just a million perspectives running around. And I have over time, sort of been drinking less and less and less, and honestly not noticed any difference one way or the other. So, when I asked you, I said, what do you think about this? Because I know that you don't drink 2 to 3 liters of water a day. I hung out with you. I didn't see you do that. So I want, and your mind is razor sharp. You're obviously not 30 years old. I won't reveal. I don't even know your true biological age, but you are doing just fine. Okay. And so when I asked you, I thought to get your take, having written a book on the subject, as you did, on what you think is going on with our relationship to water, the optimal potentially relationship that we could develop with water. And I want to start by really a basic understanding that most of us have learned in school, including my kids recently just learned this around energy, right? So how is it that are we told water has a role in our vitality and our energy? What is our best understanding as far as the conventional model? And then what do you think water has to do with, the production of energy that could be contingent upon how much you're taking in or not? So I want to start with sort of the basic biology, because, you run a clinic now called the New Biology Clinic. And that's a lot of what I see you contributing to the world is these more sophisticated, more complex, and more beautiful, I would say, perspectives on how biology really might be functioning, right? How the body actually works. And the relationship between water and bodily energy production, I think, is one that I'm even just beginning to wrap my mind around, because I'm still on some level in the ATP world, even mitochondrial world. A lot of functional medicine is about powering up your mitochondria so that more energy can be made. And when you answered me about this water question, I thought this just needs to be a podcast. You need to share this with everyone. So maybe we can start there with sort of the known, quote unquote, known biochemical pathways and how you have seen things differently.
All right.
Is that a weird question? Maybe that's not a clear question.
Yeah. Also, just the historical aspect. I once asked my grandfather, who I never saw drink water, and I really was close to my father's father, Gramps. I said, do you ever drink water? He says, no, vodka tastes better. He actually had how people have those things of water that they're 3 gallons or I don't know, thing. He had one of vodka that he had over the refrigerator. And so you could go by and just push the plunger and
Genius.
Yeah.
And he didn't die of dehydration somehow. Yeah.
I don't know, actually had lung cancer, but that was when he was 90 something. So I think, we were talking about this briefly, and I don't remember who it was who said it. It was Aristotle or Socrates or somebody, but give me an assumption and I can prove anything. So, when I was thinking about, so where should we go with this? And so we could talk about the energy, but I think there's even a step beyond this, which I think people haven't thought about much. And it also connects us to the world, which I think is important in anything. So where does the water of our bodies, or B, on Earth come from? And it's also interesting because it's also a corollary to another sort of truth that's not true, which is, where do fossil fuels come from? Now, let's start with the story. Where does the water on Earth come from? So I'm not sure exactly. It's one of those things they never actually tell you directly because they know it would sound stupid. But so it's essentially what we're sort of led to believe. So the assumption in this equation is somehow there was the world and there was the water. And that's all the water there is. So it's a finite resource, essentially. And then it goes through this hydrological cycle where you have, ponds and the ocean and rivers and puddles, and they evaporate and they go up into the air and they form clouds, and then the clouds rain down, and then that's called the hydrological cycle. So all the water keeps cycling through those pathways, and aquifers, which are the reservoirs of water under the earth, they get replenished through the rain and through runoff from streams and lakes and stuff like this. But in other words, the fundamental assumption there is there's a finite amount or reservoir of water on the place we call Earth, right? And again, it's another one that's similar is the fossil fuels. These are decomposed fossils from way back, and they get compressed because of the pressure in the earth, and they become oil somehow. And so they're a finite, limited resource. Same with the water in us. In other words, 99% of our molecules are supposedly water. 70% of our volume is supposedly water. That's what we're told. And you can measure that. So that's probably accurate. And it's like a hydrological cycle. In other words, you pee some out and you sweat some out and you evaporate some out and then you put some in. And so the putting some in is like the clouds raining, and then the sweating and the peeing and the evaporating, that's like the evaporation up. And that's all the water there is in any of those. And that's all the fossil fuels there is. So that's the fundamental assumption behind drinking water, is that you lose water by peeing, sweating, evaporating, and maybe other reasons. And so you have to replenish it. And it's the fundamental assumption in, water scarcity stuff, that's all the water there is. And the only way out of that dilemma of if there's too many of us or using too much water is to desalinate ocean water so we get more water that way. So here's the problem, which then puts everything in a different light. None of those assumptions are actually accurate and easily disproven. So, for instance, with the fossil fuel thing, they say the biotic level goes down to about 20,000 meters, right? Below that, there's no sign of life, right? So you can't have anything below 20,000 meters that's made from, compressed life. But the Russians have been drilling 50,000 meters for oil for decades. That's one of the reasons people hate them, is because they figured out that there is a renewable source of oil below the biotic level that essentially inexhaustible. Well, that's a whole different story. And it's not fossil fuels, and doesn't mean it's good to burn them or not. That's a whole different issue. But they're not fossil fuels, and it's not a limited resource. So that's the first one. The second one is the same with water. There's a thing called primary water, which is water that's made in the earth somewhere, down below, and it comes up to the surface of the earth, just like Victor Schauberger, who knew more about water than anybody, said, the water you should drink should never have been in the air, and it should have come up on its own power to the surface of the earth. So like a spring that bubbles up by itself. And we now know that's called primary water. It's made de novo, anew, deep in the earth somewhere, and then it travels up by coursing through the rocks and making pathways for itself, and comes up on its own terms, on its own power, and emerges as springs. And all the healing springs that have ever been used have been this kind of primary water. Now, if somebody says, well, Tom, how do you know that's never been in the hydrological cycle, right? It's never been in that evaporating clouds rain. It's actually simple, because all the water in the hydrological cycle has what's called isotope, which is a that's a whole different thing to get into what an isotope is, but it's a variation of hydrogen called tritium. And the water in the hydrological cycle all has tritium, more or less, depending on how many times it's gone up and down. And primary water has no tritium in it because it's never been in the air to pick up that form of hydrogen. So it's very easy to tell which is which. And essentially, you don't want tritium in your water that you're exposed to. It's not real water. It's heavier water. It's not very good for biological systems. So you can make the case that's why people looked for primary water, even though they didn't know that. And there's a whole Primary Water Institute, and you can go and see all the research and all that. So what does this have to do with your question? It turns out that we, like the earth, make primary water. And that changes everything, because the water that we're meant to have is made by us. Now, you could say, well, that's a strange idea, except it, insofar as we believe like the Krebs cycle, and you talked about all these people who talk about mitochondria, they say that the oxidative phosphorylation pathway, Krebs cycle, is taking sugar and you go enzyme and electron transport and charge transport, and you end up with carbon dioxide and water. That's where the water's made. In other words, when you metabolize food into this ATP that you're talking about, the byproduct, or maybe the product, is water. And so that is water that's your water. And I would contend that insofar as you're healthy, one of the definitions is all the water that's in you, you made yourself. That could be a definition. So if you need water to replenish because you're sweating and peeing and evaporating, then you have more food and your mitochondria are healthy, and they make the water to replenish the deficit because you sweated and peed and evaporated. And there's very little need in that, except in certain situations where it may be accelerated or something, where you would need to actually drink exogenous water from the outside.
It's such a massive paradigm shift in understanding. And I think that I just want to put neon lights around the metaphysical implications of the shift from a scarcity model, right? Because it's either intentionally and nefariously or just an unintended consequence. It is programmed into all of these cycles, these concepts of cycles, that there is scarcity for us to consider, and what that does, of course, on a psycho-emotional level to our perception of reality is non-negligible. So to shift,
There's no scarcity of water. There's 90% of the water that's used came from primary water sources. It's inexhaustible. Same with oil and gas. And same with our personal water, inexhaustible.
Does that mean that you're only ever contending with pollution, so to speak, and, toxicant-laden water when you are drinking hydrological cycle water, right? So it really becomes an issue when you're not interacting with primary water or creating the conditions, which I do want to get into, to produce your own water in the best possible way. So how does this shift how we look at, polluted water and the necessity of reverse osmosis filtration, and considering how we have, really disturbed water? Because, right, if it's scarce, then it gets dirty and we have a problem, right? A big problem. And I'm not suggesting that we don't have a big problem just in the care of this realm, but it sounds like it's a different issue if it is produced anew consistently by the earth and within us. We have a different relationship to the fear that might be, right, that might take hold around how much we have messed things up.
Well, let's take a step further back, because the ATP connection is important in this, because this is another basic, because we're talking about essentially definitions of health. Like some people will say, if you, in order to be healthy, you have to drink 2 liters a day. That's what's behind, your daughter or her friends. That's the definition of health. Otherwise, you get dehydrated. But here's another way to look at it. We are essentially like a battery, and we have a charge, and we also have a polarity, and we have even energy centers that spin in a certain way called chakras. But, and we don't have time to go into the whole evidence and proof of this, but I talked about this in the cancer book. So when we have charged tissue, that's what we mean by healthy. And it's able to do things and create. And interestingly, if you say that to a medical doctor, the definition of a healthy tissue is when it has the proper charge. They say, oh, that's bullshit. We don't. So how do you know if somebody's heart's healthy? Well, you do an EKG and you measure the voltage, the electricity going through their heart, right? So if it's normal, that's the healthy. Well, how do you know if they're alive? You do an EEG, and if their brain has got electrical activity, they're alive. And if it doesn't, they're dead. Well, how do you know if your muscles work? Well, we do an EEG. And yet they say an electrical potential, electrical charge isn't relevant. That's life, is the charge. So how do you make the charge? The charge is because of the unique properties of structured or dipole water creates a charge. How do you make structured water? You take proteins, which are, essentially long charged molecules insofar as there's any molecules, but again, let's forget about that. And just like making Jell-O, right? You put gelatin, proteins, water, nothing happens. You have to heat up this mixture, unfolds the proteins, they connect with water, and then when they cool, they make this gel form. The gel form conducts electricity, especially when it has ions in it, sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, etc. That's just basic chemical kind of facts. So the exact same thing happens in us. This process of respiration, making energy, they make ATP and water, and the ATP it's not energy, it attaches to the proteins and acts like heat with Jell-O, right? If the proteins are like this, you heat them, they unfold, they connect with water. The proteins are not in the right configuration. There's like a attachment point for the ATP, it unfolds them. And then they get attached to water, create the gel, create the voltage, create the electrical charge. Then you're a living battery. And they also need, quote, ions or minerals, sodium, potassium, the rest. So that's why people have been fooled into thinking ATP is energy. Because if you don't make ATP, you don't respire, you don't make water, you don't make ATP, you can't make a gel, and then you're a dead battery, and you have dead fluid, which is what we call edema, or you have hardened fluid, which is what we call a cataract, or you have fluid on your knee that's not moving, and we call that arthritis. And we call disease that's dead fluid that needs to be excreted, we call that a cold or a bronchitis. So we call dead water without a charge, we call that sickness. So if you have healthy mitochondria producing ATP and water, then you make a charge, and then you're a living, healthy, vibrant being. That's how it works. And there's other factors, you pick up charge from the environment, and, and there's connections with people that charge you up, right? Or ruin your charge. We've all seen that, and there's all kinds of factors that go into it, but that's the basic. So if you're drinking polluted water, then you can't make a healthy crystalline water or mesophase or gel, because now you got poison grapes dissolved in your gel. So then you don't make a charge. And you've substituted exogenous water, hydrological cycle water, into that system, and it doesn't make you the gel that's meant to be you. And so you essentially, in a funny sort of way, feel like you're a different person. And people say that, this isn't me, right? This isn't how I'm supposed to be. Like, I'm a happy person, but I don't feel happy anymore. Or my legs don't work, or I can't run, or my skin doesn't feel the same. It's not you. It's like exogenous water it's coming in, and it doesn't form the crystalline structure that's you. So then your body has to try to do something with that, usually dissolve it, get rid of it, and remodel it. And so that's where diseases come. So we digest our knee fluid with inflammation because we don't want that crystal that's not healthy. It's got too much toxins in it. It's got distorting, it's got tritium in it, so that instead of a perfect crystal, it's all messed up, and we get a distortion of our structure, which doesn't work right. And our body in its wisdom tries to remodel that. And we call that, unfortunately, disease. So that's a long-winded answer. I tend to do that. But that's the problem with taking hydrological water and trying to cleanse it. That's better than drinking hydrological water with, glyphosate in it and EMF destructuring and tritium in it and all the chemtrail stuff because you're talking about water that keeps going up and down through the air and all this stuff in the air and is in the streams, and instead of water that is made anew. And so it's just the purest form of water moving through rocks, picking up minerals, hopefully nothing else, that's analogous to the water that we make ourselves. So just to finish that's why, I sought out a spring that's primary water, and that's where I get my water from.
So people love to ask me questions, and I love to ask questions of others because inquiry is play. But some of my interviews and answers are too hot to handle for Reclamation Radio. So in my membership Vital Life Project, I have created a private podcast that gets delivered to wherever you listen to podcasts, where I answer your questions that arise because of my provocative subject matter. And I also share interviews that might otherwise be censored that I call the Sovereignty Series. So you'll get access to these private podcasts and a private chat by joining my membership Vital Life Project. I'll see you in there. Yeah, that makes sense. But it sounds like there are at least two potential, sort of ways that people can wander off the path. One is if they are like bogging down their system, right? So I think you would say when I was drinking the 3 liters a day for those 9 days, it was problematic, actually, right? To bring that much, and I use an Ophora, I have Alive water. It could be worse, in terms of the quality. But regardless, it was waterlogging literally my system to an extent that represented its own stressor. So you have this like overhydrating with ultimately hydrological cycle water. And then there is the dehydration end of the pole, which comes, it sounds like, from something else, right? Something other than just not drinking enough water. So neither of those problems is solved by just drinking, more water or relating to available filtered water differently, because both of them are systemic issues, right? So you described for me what you think you referenced it a little bit, just what you think drives dehydration, what we call dehydration, okay? And then the problems that could be caused by, flooding the system with what ultimately becomes dead water, bulk water that interferes with the optimal gel formation, right? So we have issues across the board, but let's maybe detail a little bit more about like what you think people are calling dehydration. Like, what are they actually dealing with?
Yeah, maybe we could start the other side. So because I wrote about this in the Heart book, and you can see this. So the pump that drives the circulation of the blood, which is crucial for health, right? We're supposed to be well circulated, well perfused, is the gels in the capillaries. You get a hydrophilic tube with water, forms a negatively charged gel that separates the charges, creates a gradient that moves the blood. Now, let's say for some reason, and that's charged by sunlight, essentially, and connection to the earth. So let's say you never had sunlight and you're not making these gels. And so your pump is weak. Now, it's the same as if you have a pump in your house that's leaking, right? So you're not getting a shower, isn't going strong. What would happen if you dumped in 2.5 times the amount of water in the system? It would leak worse, right? Because now there's too much water, it's heavier, and your system would have to discharge that water somewhere. And that's exactly what we do. So we have a bad pump because we have bad water and not enough exposure to the force, the electromagnetic force, which is light, that structures the water. So we have bad circulation. And so then we put twice as much water because they tell us we're dehydrated, and then we leak. What is that? Leaking means pee all the time, or you get fluid in your legs called edema, or you feel waterlogged. So your tissues feel like they have this dead fluid in them, and you're sluggish, and dead fluid doesn't create a charge. So you feel sluggish and weak and low energy. So that's because you corrected a energy problem by flooding the system. So that's the one side. Now, the other side is if you're not making primary water, that's the problem. And so you have a metabolic energy production problem. And that could be because you're poisoning your mitochondria. There's lots of ways to do that. Or because you don't have enough light exposure or earth exposure or loving exposure or touch exposure with other people or connection with animals, and lots of things that actually create the energetic field that strengthens and promotes mitochondria. And besides, you're not eating good food, et cetera. So you're not generating primary water, so you're dehydrated. Now you try to correct that by putting in, at worst, polluted hydrological water. And that makes the whole thing worse because now you can't even structure and make this crystalline, coherent, gel of the water that you do have, which is your energy. And so you feel waterlogged and low energy, et cetera, whereas you think that you should have corrected your dehydration. You may have more water inside you, but it's not in the right form. And you could probably help a little bit by drinking primary water with ions, with you have to have source of minerals, and that probably helps some, but it's, and it maybe even helps enough to be a reasonable solution. But it's not the same as if you make the water yourself. But at the end of the day, the only solution is to not have a mitochondrial energy creation deficit. That's the solution to this, which then you have to ask, how does that go? And that's a lot of that has to do with sunlight exposure and connection with electromagnetic fields and, connection with other living beings and earthing and good food and all the usual, not poisoning your mitochondria and detoxify all that stuff.
And that's because through that cellular, if I can still say that, respiration process, you are making the structuring ATP for the water to become a crystalline gel, and you're actually making water from food.
From food. In the water that's imprinted with your energetic field. There's a saying that if you eat carrots and you talk like a carrot, there's something wrong with you. You're supposed to make the world your own. You don't. It's just like if you say what Tom or Kelly says, that's a problem. You hear things, you process them, you make them your own, and then you feel alive and healthy and, inspired. But if you're just spouting off somebody else's ideas, you're a follower. That's a problem.
Not producing your own primary source material.
Right. In their case, primary thoughts. And of course, we all have that. We get told, even in relationship, this is the kind of person you should be with. This is the kind of career you should have. This is the kind of exercise you should do. This is the way you should think about this or that. I mean, that's a problem.
And we can be inspired, I think, right, by what feels resonant. I mean, that word has never been more true for the reasons that we're discussing today. That when you come into contact with spoken words and, energetic signatures that feel like home, right? Like that feel like an exhale, that feel like a remembrance, there's something there for you, right? To work with. So in service of that, rather than say, this is how Tom does it, this is how everyone should do it, I would love for you to share a bit about how you do it, right? How you naturally apply these theoretical principles that we've been exploring. Maybe you wouldn't call them theoretical, but these principles we've been exploring. In case anybody listening says, okay, that makes sense to me, because that's what happened. Like when you shared with me, okay, this is how I do my day, I was like, that makes sense to me. That feels true. And I'm going to adapt that for my own purposes. So I was somewhat surprised to hear that you basically drink 1 glass of water a day. So I'd love for you to take people through, so like a typical day in terms of creating the conditions for this inner charge to be optimized, for your own primary water to be best produced and then stewarded, right? Because that's what your choices do. They steward the water. I just had Veda Austin on the podcast, and that's clearly there's a zeitgeist here, right? Like clearly we are understanding that what I would consider water a feminine principle, that there is a homecoming, right? There's a homecoming here, and we are aligning with this massive reframe around what these bodies actually are and how we can steward the water within us, and of course without, but for our purposes in this conversation, let's talk about within. So how do you do that every day? Like, what is your routine as far as optimizing the conditions and drinking the water? And I also, I think I asked you this, there's not a way can people find out where primary water sources are? Is there like
Yeah, there's a Primary Water Institute and they publish stuff, but basically almost everywhere has primary water somewhere near you that comes up all over everywhere. And any water that's basically coming up from the earth by its own accord, that's not wells. That's probably primary water. And you can get it tested for pollutants. You could even get it tested for tritium if you want. And that'll tell you whether it's primary water. But if you ask old people who've been around, they'll know where, oh yeah, this guy's got a spring over in his farm somewhere and the water just spouts up. And it spouts up, it's been spouting up for 100 years, just continually. So, yeah, and just to say, I always think, so I tell people, right, it's great to hear different people's opinions and strategies, not so you do it, but I think we should hear as many as possible, just so we get, and that's one of the problems today is people, I'm not going to listen to anybody who says anything different than what I think, right? So that's a problem. So this is just me, and I'm not like saying like I'm the pinnacle of,
right.
Like what if I drop dead tomorrow? Then what was there? I'm not doing that because
I'll delete the episode. It'll be a shameful marring of your track record.
So what I'm thinking of is purest water, charge, and ions. That's what I'm thinking. So here's what I do with water. I don't know if I've ever said this. So, and I'm also a kind of a habit sort of guy. Like I do the same thing kind of every day for
simple guy. That's what I said. That's what I observed. You're just a simple guy.
First thing in the morning, I have a bottle of this sea plasma in the refrigerator. Used to be Quinton, but now not to be a commercial, but we have one that's, I think, better because it's pure, which is vortex seawater. And the phytoplankton collect in there and they poop in it. So it's rich in minerals and has a long and illustrious history of helping with all kinds of things. So I drink a cap full of that and swish it around in my mouth. That's the first thing. Then I make cat food.
That takes 2 hours.
Yeah, that takes 2.
You have to kill the deer and whatever else you're doing.
And then I soak my head in ice cold water 5 times, just my face. I heard that from Goethe originally, but I think it also stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system and helps wake up. And I just feel, I don't like doing it, but I feel it's not fun, but I do it every morning. And then I have a 500 milliliter jar in a Mirin jar. And in there is either this primary water that I collect in glass bottles that I put in a Mayu filter now, which is spins it for about 10 minutes. And then I do our water wand for another minute. And then I keep it, then I pour it into this jar, this 500 milliliter, and I put basically half a lemon squeezed in there. If I feel like there's something wrong and I feel like I need more charge, instead of the lemon, I use chlorine dioxide solution. And that 500 milliliters, so I drink that and then I go on about my day. And I'm always looking to be more out in the sun and more connected with the earth and more connected with the animals. And gardening and then there's computer stuff. But that's, and then I don't really drink any more water. I do drink other stuff, which is mostly fermented beverages that Linda makes with different herbs and apple cider vinegar and sometimes raw honey. And so she makes a variety of those, sometimes beet kvass. I make kefir from goat milk, so I drink that. And I think I told you, I have one, it's not an addiction, but it's sort of a vice, which is I absolutely love sparkling water with a little bit of some sort of herbal oxymel in it. That's like my biggest treat. So I use a high silica primary water, sparkling water, bottle that. So I mix that with that and I'll drink that a few times a day.
Got to come up with some more interesting vices than that.
It's my kind of big, it's really expensive. Mark Bailey told me about it from New Zealand. It's definitely primary water. It's high in silica, which I think has some interesting properties. And it's naturally sparkling. So that all appeals to me. And like I say, I mix that with, these fermented drinks. And that's what I drink the rest of the day. And I'll usually drink other water.
It's called like Antipodes or something?
Yeah, Antipodes, Antipodes. Really expensive. But I have only drink about 500 milliliters a day. And otherwise, I have soup broth every day, pretty much, bone broth. And I eat food that has water in it. Sometimes in the summer, if I grow enough carrots, I'll make carrot juice, which I think is very sort of structured water. That's a fluid that I'll drink. Beet kvass I like, especially when I have enough beets, which is chopped up beets with whey or yogurt and some salt. And so most of these have some salt in it. And of course, the salt is Redmond salt or Celtic salt or some kind of salt like that. Or I use that stinky bamboo salt, which has lots of sulfur in it. I'm not, I'd say, a regular salt user. Like I don't limit salt intake, but it's almost all of it. I don't eat very much processed food. So all the salt is salt that we add to our food. And that's pretty much it. And the rest of it is trying to, be out in the sun. Now, we do have a water filter in our home, which is a sort of carbon filter, Pure Effects. And then it goes through this copper twisted rod, which creates vortices. And that goes to the showers and the tubs and even the hot tub. And then I also have an Ophora water station. So that's the town water that comes into the house. And so that's, filtered, vortexed, filtered again, and vortex. And I use that mostly if I want to some sort of like distilled water for some purpose.
I'm struck by even the sort of morning ritual with the 500 mils of water that you do drink, that it's, it's probably totally unnecessary for you to wand the water and, spin it in the mayu and all the rest. But it's on a meta level, there's almost like I don't know, like a morning practice, morning meditation, like a morning devotional experience. And Veda would be the first to say that having a relationship, to water, maybe even those 500 milliliters are symbolic of your saying, this matters, this matters. I'm going to treat it in this ritualistic way. I mean, who even knows, right? That might be part of why you can extract and produce all of the rest of the high integrity water that you do throughout the rest of the day, because you have that foundation set. I don't know, that just struck me as you were describing it, because I mean, you wouldn't have written a book about the subject if you weren't onto the notion that repairing and restoring our relationship to water as human beings is paramount. Right? Like, this is a big deal. and it's not as simple as what I've been selectively informing myself around, which is like, just drink more. It has to be structured and filtered, but just drink more of it and force yourself to do it because it's the right thing to do. Like, no sustaining vitalistic practices should require forcing yourself to do something. Right. And I know that, you are very resistant in what I've known of you to trends, right? Like, you don't hop on board, whatever health trends I even might be susceptible to, because I like experiences. I'm a double Gemini. Like, I just need stimulus and I need new things that are fun. I'll try it, and that's sort of what got me into this water fast, crisis, if you will, is that I just wanted to have the experience, just see what it's like. And I have a strong will, so I could push myself through it. That's not the way you relate to, from what I've observed, to your body, to your experience of health, and to your lifestyle. That there is ease and pleasure and like a strong discernment around, what makes sense versus like these sort of blind leaps, that many of us take into sort of powering over our resistance or powering through our resistance. So yeah, I love hearing about.
Yeah, I don't like forcing myself to do
to do anything.
And I remember talking with Jamin, my movement friend. We agreed that you should never try to do anything either, because if you're trying to do something, that means you're actually not doing it. I remember people say, I'm going to try to go to sleep. And I would say, how do you do that? Well, it's ridiculous. The other thing I do with water, I just remembered, is along those lines, I do actually express gratitude every day for my water, for helping me live in a way that feels good. And that, I mean, we never know. I don't know what any of these things are doing, but it feels right. And I don't like not doing it. Like, it doesn't feel right. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's that compass, that you have, that I think is so clear, because you can sit comfortably with the not knowing until that knowing arises. And it's, I'm very honored to have such a front row seat to your process, and so grateful every day, that I have your advice and guidance and your discernment, and that I can, if I'm ever up to weird shit that everybody knows about, it's probably because I didn't run it by you. So I'm learning.
Yeah. It's interesting too, this thing about with the water fast. If I was going to do a water fast, I would also really try to energetically charge my body so that I was making as much primary water myself, because even without the food, you still have metabolism going on, and you would be processing your own tissue, your own fat, maybe. And so I would really work on that.
But maybe you would have said dry fasting is even, with so-called dry fasting, right? Would have even been better than drinking 3 liters of water in this. I mean, if I had asked you, which I didn't, I could have. If I had said, Tom, do you think I should what do you think? Should I do this? You would have told me no. Unequivocally, for sure, you would have told me don't do it. So,
I just want to also be clear. I'm not saying that nobody has been helped by water fasting. That's not true. And, I obviously doing the best water and et cetera. There's a lot of things that just giving your metabolism a rest have helped. But I think there's questions we should ask and yeah, that's all.
there's also wellness optimization and just self-experimentation and exploration. And then there is the ritual that you engage when you are, having an existential moment in your life journey, right? So many people who have had, and the gentleman that I worked with has had, done 10,000 cases and extraordinary outcomes. So of course, it would be silly to suggest that it's problematic or even inadvisable. But these are in folks who are at that fork in the road and need a ritual. And obviously, that's what I peddle through Vital Mind Reset. It's these rituals are extremely powerful. And when you're at that fork in the road, I still would say that it's worth considering. But for just wellness and exploration, especially in women, I can't say that I would be the greatest ambassador of that kind of a practice versus, like you said, focusing on optimizing the conditions of how charge is moving through your body first and foremost.
It's interesting now that you think, because I had the flash of wondering if you water fast and you don't drink too much, you may be essentially egging or forcing your mitochondria to produce more water. So like get that function going.
Right. And it's, I am a huge Kinton fan actually, and have for years taken it. But even if I were taking those ampules, right, like even just like a little bit of support, but it was just strict water, no lemon, no salt, no nothing. So yeah, I think there maybe are some slight modifications, but then you'd be off in the wilderness, because this is the protocol that has been, there's a huge field of belief around it. There are outcomes around it. This is how it's done. And you'd be, pioneering on your own, which certainly is probably more and more what is being asked of us these days, with gentle support and like-minded, folks to bounce our experience off of. So to that end, Tom, I'd love for you to say a word or two about your clinic, about the New Biology Clinic, because I know that that's the ethos that I've had the pleasure of sitting in on some of the meetings that take place with can I call them faculty, with the folks who are, offering support to your members. And that is the ethos from what I have observed. It is, how can we create the conditions for people to find within themselves what makes the most sense? And you have collected like-minded practitioners. And when I say like-minded, I mean around, things like having been disabused of germ theory, et cetera. I just interviewed for Reclamation Radio, Maureen McMichael, who's a veterinarian who's on your staff. And it's extraordinary to be creating a field of health reclamation, I'll call it that, that is predicated on these fearless, principles. And then, the people who, it's like just sometimes interacting with somebody who shares that foundational belief, it helps you to remember within yourself what is best. Doesn't mean you're going to do exactly what they say. It doesn't mean you're going to necessarily follow protocol. It's not like you guys are selling some protocol in there. That's not what's going on. It's a community-based reorientation towards yourself. And I think it's fantastic. I love every single person that I've met through you in that space. So I'd love for you to just speak a little bit about what you're up to in there and how generous you are with your time and attention, in my opinion, in those spaces with your community and members. And we'll make sure that people know how to opt in.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kelly. And I mean, there's so few people now who are like medical doctors or healthcare practitioners. There's you and Andy, and that's about it. But so it's sort of like a challenge, particularly from my son, Asher, So here we are talking about all these things. Why don't we do something about it? Like help people. Like I'm too busy or whatever. I'm not too busy. It's lazy. But so we say, we have these principles, but the principles are we just don't accept things because everybody else says they're true. So if everybody says there's viruses, we don't accept it. If everybody says there's ribosome, we don't. So how do these things work? And what are the principles of helping people regain their health? And we've come together as a sort of group to try to explore these things, these ideas, and how do you translate that into, I have my foot hurts and I have a cough and I just had a heart attack and I just got diagnosed with ovarian cancer. How do you translate these ideas into an actual way of helping people's lives get better? And so that's what we're exploring. And you come to certain things that, I see it as we used to know how to do that. And there was a whole elaborate culture, civilization based on healing and healing modalities. And it got lost, largely. And so we're at the beginning of recreating how does that all work. And so we're all baby steps in this. And so if we're all baby steps, it's not a bad idea to form a group of people and say, what did you see and what happened with this and what did this person tell you, and maybe if you had asked them this. And so we're essentially forming a group around people who are asking for our help and seeing if we can help them. And it's really exciting because the group of people who are working on this are just really into it. They're fabulous. They're honest, searching people. And you can't ask for anything more than that, who don't accept things because that's the way they were told. I mean, we've all the doctors have been through medical school. It's like it's indoctrination, and it's not easy to get out of that. But once you do, it's incredibly freeing, exciting, and the possibilities are endless. But we have to work together to figure out where we go from here. That's how I see it. So yeah, we appreciate everybody's interest in joining us, and we have all kinds of events and ways of looking at it. People who've become expert in biofield tuning and emotional freedom, and a vet and a neurologist and a psychiatrist who don't do that anymore, but also have, I make a distinction between treating the psyche of a person versus treating a person who has a psyche, and the psyche may be the field that's most interfered with right now. So you may have ALS, that's a neurological problem, and it's not a bad idea to have somebody who's seen that 20, 30, 40 times. But you're not going to be treated as a nervous system disease. Every disease is you, no exceptions.
Amen. And I think it is wise for us to not throw the baby out with the bathwater of experience, right? So having seen, what I would call these patterns of so-called diagnoses, it does inform, especially when you've come to this new perspective and this new paradigm. It does inform and weave this quilt. That's what I was. It's like we're all weaving this quilt together, and it is grassroots and it is community sourced, and you are creating the space for us to do that. So I'm so grateful to you.
Oh, so are you, Kelly.
Wow.
Big time.
Yeah, together.
Big time.
You've pulled some MDs out of the woodwork that I didn't know existed. So it's not just me, you, and Kaufman any longer. And that feels great. It feels really good and fun. Like you said, inspirational and exciting. And that's how the truth should feel that way. So thank you, Tom, for this chat. There will be more. And yeah, always good. Thank you.